Sometimes the smartest person in the room is the one everyone ignores. The dining room of Lark and Ivy glowed with warm golden light, crystal glasses reflecting softly against polished wood tables as the quiet hum of Manhattan's elite filled the air. At table 12 sat Ethan Caldwell, a 38-year-old CEO whose investment firm controlled billions of dollars and whose time, according to most people around him, was worth thousands of dollars an hour. His charcoal suit fit perfectly, his silver watch caught the light every time he lifted his hand, and his calm confidence carried the unmistakable weight of someone used to making decisions that moved entire markets. Across from him sat two business partners discussing numbers, contracts, and expansion plans while the scent of freshly grilled steak drifted from the open kitchen. Then the waitress approached. Her name tag read Emily Carter. She looked young, mid-20s perhaps, her blonde hair tied neatly behind her head, her black server uniform pressed clean and simple. She carried a small order pad and a quiet professionalism that made her almost invisible among the marble floors and expensive suits surrounding her. "Good evening," she said calmly. "May I take your order?" Ethan barely looked up at first. He tapped his glass lightly with a finger, glanced at the menu, and then switched languages without warning. In smooth, confident German he said, "Das ribeye steak. Medium rare. Und bit Sorgen Sie dafür, dass es dies Mal richtig gemacht wird." His colleagues smirked. One of them chuckled quietly. Ethan leaned back slightly and added another sentence in German, just loud enough for the table to hear. "Ich wette, hier verstet sowieso niemand Deutsch. I bet no one here understands German anyway." The men laughed softly, the kind of casual amusement that came easily when people were certain they held all the advantage in a room. Emily simply nodded once, wrote something down, and replied politely in English. "Of course, sir." Nothing in her voice changed. No reaction, no confusion, just quiet professionalism. Then she turned and walked away toward the kitchen, her steps calm, steady, and unhurried. Ethan smirked slightly and lifted his water glass. "See," he said casually. "Exactly my point." But less than 60 seconds later, Emily returned. She set the glass of sparkling water gently beside him and placed a small folded piece of paper next to his menu. "Your order will be out shortly, Mr. Caldwell," she said with the same calm tone. Ethan glanced at the note with mild curiosity. He unfolded it casually, and then he stopped moving. Because written across the page in perfectly structured German was a simple message: medium rare ribeye, as requested. And just for future reference, sir, assuming no one understands your language usually says more about you than it does about them. For the first time that evening, the billionaire CEO Ethan Caldwell didn't speak. He simply stared at the note, while across the restaurant, the quiet waitress was already serving another table as if nothing unusual had happened at all. The paper remained in Ethan Caldwell's hand longer than he expected, the smooth white surface suddenly feeling heavier than it should have. For a man who negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions without hesitation, it was a strange sensation to be caught off guard by a single sentence written in careful handwriting. Across the table, Daniel Mercer leaned forward and lowered his voice. "You look like someone just changed the rules of your game," he said. Ethan did not answer immediately. His eyes moved slowly across the German sentence again, studying the grammar, the structure, the tone. It was not just correct. It was natural, native level, the kind of phrasing that people learned by living inside a language, not by memorizing phrases from a textbook. He placed the paper beside his plate and glanced across the dining room. Emily Carter was already at another table, calmly pouring iced water for a couple seated near the window. Her movements were efficient and quiet, almost practiced like a rhythm. No hesitation. No glance back toward table 12. No sign that she had just left a billionaire executive staring at a note like a confused student. Daniel chuckled softly. "You did not expect that, did you?" Ethan finally spoke, his voice calm but thoughtful. "No, I did not." His other colleague, Michael Grant, lifted his eyebrows. Maybe she took a language class somewhere. Ethan shook his head slightly. That sentence was not classroom German. He leaned back in his chair and folded his arms loosely, his eyes still fixed on the far side of the restaurant where Emily now carried a tray of drinks through the crowd. Her posture remained relaxed, balanced, controlled. "Listen to the phrasing," Ethan said quietly, tapping the note once with his finger. "The tone is polite, but precise. Someone who understands nuance wrote this. Michael laughed lightly. You are analyzing a waitress like she is a corporate consultant. Ethan did not smile. That is exactly the point. A moment later, Emily returned to their table carrying a polished white plate. The ribeye steak rested at the center, steam rising gently from its surface. She placed it carefully in front of Ethan with the same calm professionalism she had shown earlier. Your medium-rare ribeye, sir, she said. Ethan looked up at her for the first time with genuine attention. Her expression was neutral, respectful, but there was something steady in her eyes that did not match the nervous politeness most servers showed around powerful clients. Thank you, he said slowly. Emily gave a small nod and turned to leave, but Ethan spoke again before she could walk away. Miss Carter. She stopped and faced him. Yes, sir. Ethan lifted the small note between two fingers. Your German is excellent. For the first time that evening, something shifted in her expression. Not pride, not surprise, just a quiet acknowledgement. Thank you, she replied calmly. Languages are useful. Daniel could not help laughing at the understatement. Useful, he repeated. That is one way to describe it. Ethan studied her face carefully. Where did you learn it? Emily paused for half a second, just long enough to show that the question had landed somewhere deeper than expected. Then she answered with the same steady tone. Mostly by listening. And before Ethan could ask anything else, she turned and walked toward the kitchen, leaving the CEO of a $9 billion investment firm staring once again at the quiet waitress who clearly knew far more than she allowed anyone to see. The steak cooled slowly on Ethan Caldwell's plate, untouched for several seconds as his attention remained fixed on the direction Emily Carter had disappeared. For most people in the room, dinner continued exactly as expected. Conversations about market trends, investment strategies, and luxury travel drifted across the restaurant like quiet background music. But at table 12, something had shifted. Ethan picked up his fork, cut into the ribeye, and tasted it almost automatically, though his mind was somewhere else entirely. Daniel Mercer noticed immediately. You are still thinking about that note, he said with a knowing smile. Ethan did not deny it. Details matter. He replied calmly. Michael Grant leaned back in his chair and laughed softly. You are the only person I know who can turn a dinner order into a mystery. Ethan placed the fork down carefully beside his plate. People reveal themselves in small moments, he said. Most of the time they do not even realize it. Across the dining room, Emily moved between tables with the same quiet efficiency she had shown all evening. She carried a tray with 3 glasses of iced tea balanced perfectly in one hand, while the other hand opened the door for a couple entering from the street. Nothing about her behavior suggested she was trying to impress anyone. If anything, she seemed determined not to stand out at all. Daniel followed Ethan's gaze and shrugged. She is a waitress, Ethan. Maybe she studied abroad. Maybe she dated someone German. People pick up languages. Ethan shook his head slowly. You heard her answer. Mostly by listening. Michael smirked. Maybe she watches foreign films. Ethan reached for the folded paper again and smoothed it flat against the table. The handwriting is steady. The grammar is precise. And the tone is deliberate. Daniel lifted an eyebrow. You sound like you are evaluating a candidate for your executive team. Ethan looked toward the kitchen entrance where Emily had disappeared moments earlier. I evaluate everything, he said quietly. Just then the restaurant manager, a middle-aged man named Victor Hale, passed by their table greeting guests with polite professionalism. Ethan raised his hand slightly. Mr. Hale, may I ask you something? Victor approached with a courteous smile. Of course, Mr. Caldwell. Is everything satisfactory with your dinner? Ethan nodded. The food is excellent. I was actually curious about your server tonight. Victor glanced briefly across the dining room toward Emily. Miss Carter, Ethan held up the note. Yes. She mentioned she learned German by listening. That is unusual. Victor hesitated for a moment, as if deciding how much to say. Then he gave a small thoughtful nod. Emily has been working here about 11 months. Quiet. Reliable. Never late. Guests like her. Michael grinned. And apparently she surprises people. Victor allowed himself a slight smile. That seems to happen from time to time. Ethan studied the manager carefully. Does she speak other languages? Victor folded his hands politely. I have heard her speak Spanish with one of our kitchen staff, and once she helped a tourist couple from Munich who were having trouble understanding the menu. Daniel whistled softly. So she is a walking translation app. But Ethan did not laugh. He simply looked once more across the restaurant as Emily Carter placed a candle on a nearby table and quietly stepped back into the warm glow of the dining room lights. The same young waitress everyone else barely noticed, yet somehow the only person in the room who had managed to surprise him tonight. By the time Ethan Caldwell finished half of his steak, the restaurant had grown busier, the soft murmur of conversations mixing with the quiet clinking of silverware and glasses. Outside the tall windows of Lark and Ivy, the Manhattan evening had settled into its usual rhythm, yellow taxi lights sliding past like reflections in water. Yet Ethan barely noticed any of it. His attention kept drifting back to the same question. Who exactly was Emily Carter? Across the dining room, she moved calmly between tables, refilling water glasses and delivering plates with steady precision. She never rushed. She never hovered. Every movement seemed measured, as if she had done this 1,000 times before. Daniel Mercer followed Ethan's gaze again and shook his head with amusement. "You are studying her like a puzzle," he said. "Most people would just enjoy the steak." Ethan replied without looking away. "Patterns matter." Michael Grant chuckled. "You say that about everything." Ethan rested his hands lightly on the table. "Because everything follows patterns." Just then, Emily approached their table again, carrying a small tray with 2 fresh glasses of sparkling water. She placed them down carefully beside Daniel and Michael with the same calm professionalism she had shown earlier. "Can I bring anything else for the table?" she asked politely. Ethan looked up at her again, this time with quiet curiosity rather than surprise. "Miss Carter," he said. Emily paused. "Yes, sir." Ethan tapped the folded note lightly with his finger. "You mentioned listening as your way of learning German. That must require patience." For a brief moment, Emily seemed to consider the question. Then she answered simply, "Patience helps with most things." Daniel smiled at that answer. "You are not wrong." Ethan continued watching her. "Do you enjoy learning languages?" Emily nodded slightly. "Yes." Michael leaned forward, intrigued now. "How many do you speak?" The question hung in the air for a second. Emily glanced down at the table, then back at them. "Enough to understand people," she said calmly. Daniel laughed softly. "That sounds like a politician's answer." Emily allowed the smallest hint of a smile, but did not respond to the joke. Ethan noticed something then. The confidence in her voice did not match the modest way she described herself. People who exaggerated their skills spoke loudly. People who truly possessed them usually spoke quietly. "Do you read German as well?" Ethan asked. Emily gave a small nod. "Yes." Michael leaned back in his chair with a grin. "This is getting interesting." Ethan studied her expression one more moment. "Have you ever lived in Germany?" Emily paused again. The pause was subtle but deliberate. "No," she said. "Not exactly." The answer caught Ethan's attention immediately. "Not exactly" was a curious phrase. Before he could ask what it meant, Emily gently gestured toward his plate. "Is the steak prepared to your liking, Mr. Caldwell?" Ethan glanced down at the ribeye. He had barely eaten half of it. "Yes," he said honestly. "It is excellent." Emily nodded politely. "I am glad to hear that." Then she turned and walked away once more, disappearing toward the kitchen doors while the soft light of the restaurant followed her across the polished floor. Daniel exhaled slowly. "I have to admit something," he said. "Now I am curious too." Michael pointed lightly toward the kitchen. "That woman is definitely hiding a story." Ethan remained silent for a moment, watching the door close behind her. Then he said quietly, almost to himself, "Everyone is hiding a story. The real question is why." For several minutes after Emily Carter disappeared through the kitchen doors, Ethan Caldwell remained unusually quiet. Daniel Mercer noticed it immediately. Normally, Ethan dominated conversations, directing discussions the same way he directed boardrooms, with clear confidence and quick decisions. But tonight his attention kept drifting toward the same detail. The calm waitress who spoke German as if it were her native language. Daniel leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. "You are doing it again," he said with a grin. Ethan glanced at him. "Doing what?" Daniel nodded toward the kitchen. "Trying to solve a mystery that most people would forget about in 10 seconds. Michael Grant laughed softly. "He cannot help it. That is how he built a $9 billion company." Ethan allowed himself a small smile at that. Curiosity is rarely a bad habit. Across the dining room, the kitchen doors swung open again, and Emily stepped out carrying a tray of desserts for another table. The warm overhead lights reflected off the polished floor as she moved carefully through the crowded space. Her pace remained steady, almost effortless. Nothing about her suggested she was trying to impress anyone. If anything, she seemed determined to stay unnoticed. Daniel followed Ethan's gaze once more and shook his head. You realize most people here have no idea who she is. Ethan nodded slowly. Exactly. Michael raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Ethan rested his elbows lightly on the table. People reveal their real character when they believe nobody important is watching. Daniel chuckled. And you think she believes that tonight? Ethan did not answer immediately. His eyes followed Emily as she placed the desserts down for a couple celebrating a birthday near the window. She spoke quietly with them for a moment, then stepped back with a polite smile before turning away again. Confidence without attention, Ethan said thoughtfully. That is rare. Michael shrugged. Or maybe she is simply good at her job. Ethan looked down at the folded note again. The paper had begun to crease slightly where he had held it earlier. The careful handwriting still stood out clearly under the soft restaurant lighting. That was not the response of someone trying to impress a customer, he said quietly. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Then what was it? Ethan considered the question. A correction. Michael laughed. You were telling me a waitress corrected you. Ethan met his eyes calmly. Yes. Daniel smiled wider. You know what the real surprise is? Ethan glanced at him. Daniel gestured toward the kitchen again. You do not look annoyed. Ethan sat back in his chair, the faintest hint of amusement appearing on his face. Because I am not. Michael leaned forward with interest. Then what are you? Ethan paused for a moment before answering. Interested. Just then the manager Victor Hale passed their table again while checking on other guests. Ethan called him back with a small gesture. Victor approached politely. Everything still satisfactory, Mr. Caldwell? Ethan nodded once. Very much so. Then he glanced toward the kitchen doors again. But I do have another question. Victor followed his gaze and immediately understood who he meant. Ethan spoke calmly. You said Miss Carter has been here about 11 months. Victor nodded. That is correct. Ethan tapped the note gently on the table. Before that, do you happen to know where she worked? Victor hesitated slightly. Not because the question was inappropriate, but because the answer was uncertain. I am afraid she did not say much during her interview, Victor admitted. She only told me she needed steady work. Daniel raised his eyebrows. That is all. Victor nodded. That is all. Ethan looked back toward the kitchen doors one more time as they slowly swung open again. Emily Carter stepped through carrying another tray, calm as ever, unaware that the quiet curiosity she had sparked in one of the most analytical minds in Manhattan was only beginning to grow. The kitchen doors closed quietly behind Emily Carter as she disappeared once again into the steady rhythm of the restaurant. Yet Ethan Caldwell's attention remained fixed on that doorway, as if the answer to a question might walk through it at any moment. Around him, the dinner crowd continued as usual. A group near the bar laughed over a bottle of Napa Valley Cabernet. A couple near the window leaned close across candlelight. The restaurant was full of people who had come to celebrate success, close deals, or simply enjoy a quiet evening in Manhattan. Yet Ethan found himself paying attention to none of it. Daniel Mercer watched him with a half-amused expression. You are still thinking about her, he said. Ethan lifted his glass of water and took a slow sip before answering. I am thinking about information. Michael Grant leaned forward with curiosity. Information about a waitress? Ethan set the glass down. Information about people who do not match their surroundings. Daniel laughed softly. You mean like a linguistics expert serving ribeye steaks? Ethan did not respond immediately. Instead, he unfolded the small note once more and studied the handwriting under the warm light above their table. The strokes were precise and balanced, almost academic in their clarity. It reminded him of something he had seen before, not in a restaurant, in a conference room. Michael noticed the expression on Ethan's face. What is it? Ethan tapped the edge of the paper gently against the table. Have you ever noticed something that feels familiar even when you cannot place it? Daniel nodded. All the time. Ethan leaned back slightly. This handwriting reminds me of a translator who worked on a trade conference in Zurich 2 years ago. Michael blinked. You remember someone's handwriting from 2 years ago? Ethan gave a small shrug. Patterns. Daniel shook his head in disbelief. You remember things that normal people forget. Just then the kitchen doors opened again, and Emily stepped back into the dining room, carrying a tray of plates for another table. The warm light caught the edge of her hair as she crossed the floor with the same quiet confidence as before. Ethan watched her closely now, studying the small details. The way she balanced the tray with one hand. The way she adjusted the silverware on the table before setting down the dishes. There was precision in every movement. Not the rushed energy of someone new to service work. The calm control of someone who had practiced discipline in another environment before this one. Daniel followed Ethan's gaze again and smiled. Let me guess. Now you are analyzing how she walks. Ethan did not deny it. Body language reveals training. Michael chuckled. You sound like you are hiring her. Ethan looked at him calmly. Not yet. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Yet. Ethan glanced once more toward the folded note resting beside his plate. People with that level of language skill rarely disappear into ordinary jobs without a reason. Michael leaned back slowly as the idea settled in. You think something happened? Ethan nodded once. Something changed her path. Across the room, Emily finished setting down the plates and thanked the guests politely before turning away again. She passed their table without looking at them, focused on the next task waiting near the bar. For a moment, Ethan simply watched her walk past. Then he spoke quietly, almost as if thinking out loud. The real question is not how she learned those languages. Daniel folded his arms. Then what is it? Ethan looked down at the note again. The real question is why someone with that level of skill decided to hide it inside a restaurant like this. For the rest of the evening, the quiet mystery of Emily Carter remained at the edge of Ethan Caldwell's mind like a question that refused to close. The restaurant had grown louder as more guests arrived, the hum of conversation rising beneath the soft jazz. Music drifting from hidden speakers. Waiters moved quickly between tables, glasses clinked gently, and the warm scent of grilled steak and butter filled the air. Yet in the middle of all that movement, Ethan remained still, studying details most people would overlook. Across the dining room, Emily continued her work without hesitation. She cleared a table near the window, replaced folded napkins with quick precision, then paused to help an older couple read the dessert menu. Her voice remained calm, patient, respectful. There was no hint that she had just become the subject of quiet analysis at table 12. Daniel Mercer noticed Ethan watching again and shook his head with a smile. You know something, he said, lowering his voice. Most people would forget about that note by now. Ethan rested one hand lightly against the table. Most people are not trained to notice inconsistencies. Michael Grant leaned forward with curiosity. You still think she does not belong here? Ethan answered carefully. I think she belongs exactly where she decided to be. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That sounds philosophical. Ethan gave a faint smile. It is practical. Michael laughed. You were saying she chose this. Ethan nodded once. Yes. Across the room, Emily finished helping the older couple and stepped back politely while they discussed their order. She then walked toward the service station near the bar and began organizing a stack of clean glasses. The motion was smooth and practiced, yet something about the way she worked carried a quiet confidence that did not match the typical nervous energy of restaurant staff. Ethan noticed it again. The calm focus. The deliberate pace. It reminded him of professionals who had trained for years to control small details under pressure. Daniel followed his gaze. You think she used to do something else? Ethan did not answer right away. Instead, he watched Emily lift a tray and balance it effortlessly on one hand as she crossed the room again. That is not just restaurant experience, he said quietly. Michael looked intrigued. Then what is it? Ethan tapped the folded note once more with his finger. Discipline. Daniel leaned forward slightly. You are serious. Ethan nodded. Language mastery. Controlled handwriting. Precise movement. Calm responses. He paused briefly before finishing the thought. Those are learned behaviors. Michael crossed his arms slowly as the idea settled in. You think she had a different career before? This. Ethan glanced again toward the far side of the room, where Emily now spoke briefly with the bartender before picking up another order ticket. Possibly. Daniel smiled. So what are you going to do about it? Ethan looked back at the table, then toward the kitchen doors where Emily would soon pass again. His voice remained calm but certain. Nothing yet. Michael raised an eyebrow. Yet again, Ethan allowed the faintest hint of amusement. Curiosity works best when people do not realize they are being observed. Just then, Emily walked past their table, once more carrying a tray with 2 desserts and a pot of coffee. She did not slow down or glance toward them. She simply continued across the room with the same quiet focus she had shown all evening. But as Ethan watched her disappear, toward the corner table near the windows. One thought became clearer in his mind than before. Whatever story Emily Carter was hiding behind that simple black uniform, it was far more interesting than anyone in the restaurant had realized. As the evening continued, the warm lights of Lark and Ivy reflected softly across the polished tables, while the steady rhythm of dinner service moved forward without pause. Plates were cleared, desserts arrived, and the quiet music in the background blended with the low conversations of Manhattan professionals finishing their meals. Yet at table 12, Ethan Caldwell remained unusually attentive to the details around him. Daniel Mercer noticed it again when Ethan's eyes followed Emily Carter as she crossed the dining room with another tray balanced perfectly in her hand. "You are still watching her," Daniel said quietly, half amused. Ethan did not deny it. Observation is rarely wasted. Michael Grant leaned back in his chair and glanced toward the far side of the restaurant where Emily had stopped beside a table occupied by two tourists who were studying the menu with visible confusion. The couple spoke softly to each other in German. Without hesitation, Emily answered them in the same language, her tone calm and natural, guiding them through the menu with easy clarity. Michael blinked in surprise. "Well, that answers one question," he said. Daniel turned toward Ethan. "You were right." Ethan watched the exchange carefully. Emily did not show off or slow down her work. She simply helped the couple understand the options, recommended a dish, and thanked them politely. Before moving on, the interaction lasted less than a minute, but it confirmed something Ethan had suspected since the moment he read the note. That level of fluency was not an accident. Daniel leaned forward again. "That sounded like a native speaker." Ethan nodded once. "Yes." Michael folded his arms thoughtfully. "So the real question remains. Why is someone with that skill carrying trays in a Manhattan steakhouse?" Ethan rested his hands calmly on the table. "Circumstances." Daniel smiled slightly. "You mean life." Ethan gave a small nod. Across the room, Emily returned to the service station and began organizing a stack of clean plates while the bartender handed her a fresh order ticket. Her focus never shifted. No curiosity about the attention she had drawn earlier. No effort to join conversations or impress guests. Just quiet efficiency. Ethan noticed another small detail then. When she read the order ticket, her eyes moved quickly across the page the way trained readers processed information. Not slowly, not hesitantly, quickly. Michael noticed Ethan studying her again and laughed softly. "You are building an entire profile in your head." Ethan did not smile this time. People always leave clues. Daniel glanced toward Emily again as she carried another tray toward the window tables. "Then what do the clues say?" Ethan considered the question for a moment before answering. "They say she is not hiding ignorance." Michael tilted his head. "Meaning?" Ethan spoke calmly. "She is hiding experience." The idea hung in the air for a second. Daniel leaned back slowly. "So you believe she chose to step away from something bigger?" Ethan nodded once more. "Yes." Michael looked across the restaurant again, where Emily thanked another table and cleared their empty plates. "Then the real mystery is why." Ethan watched her walk past the warm lights of the dining room once again before replying quietly. "Exactly." And for the first time that evening, the thought formed clearly in his mind that whatever had brought Emily Carter to this quiet restaurant floor might be a story far more complex than anyone sitting comfortably in that dining room could imagine. The dinner crowd slowly began to thin as the evening moved toward its later hours, the soft lights of Lark and Ivy glowing warmly against the polished wood floors while the last few tables lingered over dessert and coffee. Outside the tall windows, Manhattan traffic continued flowing through the night, yellow taxis passing beneath the quiet rhythm of city lights. At table 12, Ethan Caldwell finally placed his napkin beside his plate and leaned back slightly in his chair. The meal finished, but his thoughts still circling the same quiet question that had followed him all evening. Across the dining room, Emily Carter continued working as steadily as before, clearing empty plates from a nearby table and replacing them with fresh glasses for the next guests arriving. There was nothing dramatic about the way she worked. No attempt to stand out. No effort to attract attention. Just the same quiet efficiency that had defined every movement since the moment she had written that note in flawless German. Daniel Mercer glanced toward Ethan and smiled knowingly. "You are still thinking about her story," he said. Ethan allowed a small breath of amusement. "I am thinking about unfinished information." Michael Grant chuckled softly. Only you would leave a restaurant with a mystery instead of a dessert. Ethan glanced toward the folded note resting beside his empty plate. Information rarely appears all at once. Across the room, Emily approached their table once more, this time carrying the leather bill folder in one hand. She placed it gently beside Ethan's glass with the same polite professionalism she had shown all evening. "Whenever you are ready, Mr. Caldwell," she said calmly. Ethan looked up at her again, studying her expression for just a moment. The same calm eyes, the same quiet confidence. For a brief second, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan reached for the folder and opened it. The total was exactly what he expected for a dinner in one of Manhattan's most respected restaurants. Without hesitation, he placed his credit card inside and handed it back to her. "Thank you," he said simply. Emily nodded politely. "Of course." A few minutes later, she returned with the receipt and placed the small card reader beside the table. Ethan signed the receipt slowly, then paused before handing the pen back. "Miss Carter," he said calmly. She looked up. "Yes, sir." Ethan hesitated only briefly before speaking. "Your languages are impressive." Emily met his eyes for a moment. Her answer was quiet, almost thoughtful. "They are simply tools." Daniel smiled at the simplicity of that response. Ethan closed the folder and stood from the table. His business partners followed. As he reached for his coat, he glanced once more toward the folded note he had kept beside his plate throughout the evening. Then he looked back at Emily. "Sometimes tools reveal more about a person than they intend," he said. Emily did not respond immediately. She simply gave a polite nod, the same calm expression still resting on her face. Ethan placed the folded note gently on the table beside the receipt before turning toward the exit with Daniel and Michael walking beside him. As the three men stepped out into the cool Manhattan night air, Daniel glanced back through the restaurant window. "So," he asked with a curious grin, "are you really going to let that mystery go?" Ethan slipped his coat over his shoulders and looked once more toward the warm light glowing through the restaurant glass. His voice was calm but certain. "No," he said quietly. "Stories like that do not end at dinner."